Well, we have a few minutes for some questions. I enjoyed spending time with that little boy, Justin, who may or may not be a saint. So the line in the book is, Justin may or may not be a saint, but the same can be said for all of us. So who has questions about parchment leaves or writing in general, anything? Yes.
I'm interested in what kind of women were in your life that made you be able to get into that part and such a really woman's point of view behind her?
I don't know. I think the key for me was I really got, I became sort of frozen up when I thought too much about writing a woman story, you know, and being a man. No matter what, there are just many things that a man can never completely wrap his mind around. I mean, childbirth, for instance. A man is never going to understand that completely. So mainly I had to release myself from that and just think of her as a human being. And that made a lot more sense once I did that because, you know, not all women are the same either, of course. So I just thought of her as a person, and that really freed her to become who she was. However, then there were things that only a woman can properly, you know, can experience in that way, childbirth being one of them. And so I really had to, I talked to people, you know, and I would ask them things like, you know, tell me something about childbirth you've never told anybody, that you've never articulated, you know, that you've never said out loud, and things like that. Novelists have to interview people constantly in that way, you know, and find ways to get them to tell you what you want to hear, if that makes sense.
I think you treated childbirth very well because I'm a nurse and I attended probably 3,000 or 4,000 births, and you've got the real
Oh, thank you. That's a good stamp of approval. In my third book, The Cold Tattoo, there is a woman whose baby is stillborn, and I knew that I had to be really, really careful with that to get it right. So I read a lot of writing where women had written about that experience, and I talked to people who'd gone through that experience. And that was probably the hardest thing for me as far as getting in the woman's mind, you know, and wanting to articulate that just right. What else?
Good question. What do you say about I use the word loosely, probably the dialect in fiction, especially out loud.
Well, I use what is called the salt rule. That means, just like salt, a little bit flavors and too much will ruin. The best example I can give you of that is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. If you know that book, you think of it as really, really heavy dialect, right? There's a lot of phonetic dialect, there's a lot of colloquialisms, all that. However, if you go through the book and you circle all the phonetics and all the colloquial stuff, it's not half as much as you would think. And that's because Alice Walker has done it so perfectly. She sprinkled in just what she needed to sprinkle in, so you leave the book feeling that it's a lot of dialect, when in fact it's not. So you're able just to zoom right through it and not get tripped up on anything, but you still hear it. She's used that salt rule. To me, the main thing is if you're going to write dialect, you must have actually heard people who are native speakers of the dialect speak it. You can't fake it if you don't know what that sounds like. And it's more than about the way people pronounce things. You know, it's where words are emphasized in a sentence and the way sentences are constructed and all those things. So to me, that's the main thing, is to listen to speakers of the dialect if you don't speak it yourself. Just as an aside on that, my last book is called Same Sun Here, and it's a book that I wrote with a friend of mine about a 12-year-old Eastern Kentucky boy who was writing letters to a 12-year-old South Asian Indian immigrant living in New York City. And so they had me and the other author, who is, she's Indian Irish, they had us do the audio book. So we were in a studio up in New York for several days, and the producer she did not like the way, or the director did not like the way I talked. You know, it just drove her nuts. She's like, why can't you pronounce your consonants? You know, and but just when I thought, you know, lady, I'm fixing to walk out of here because, you know, the producer came in, and he's the one who had hired me, and he overheard this, you know, she told him, she's like, I can't do anything with that accent. And he said, that's why we hired him. That's why we want him to record the book, because he talks like this little boy does, you know, and so he can do it better than anybody else because he knows how the boy speaks. And so we ended up winning the biggest prize that you can win in audiobooks, the Audio Award for Best Narration. And I always say that, you know, Neela was raised on Long Island, so she had to learn how to speak an Indian accent. She has to act that out. I didn't have to act at all, you know. I just sat down and talked, and they did some adjustments with computers to make my voice sound younger, like a younger boy's, not so deep, but the accent's all me. Yes?
Some of us had a discussion on just how you pronounce A-I-D-I-A.
I would say Adia. And I spelled that name phonetically to help you with that. You know, but there's just so many ways to pronounce it. The other one that people often don't know in the book is Matrasa. Lots of times people will call her Matrasha, or I don't know how to say it, but lots of ways. Yeah, there's a character in two of my books named Easter, and it's spelled E-A-S-T-E-R. But about half the people I talk to pronounce it Esther, which I've never understood. But I think it's just we go on other people we know, and like with a name like that, we probably don't know anybody else, right? So it's hard to know how to pronounce it. Right, and that's how most people would pronounce it. Yeah.
And then I thought maybe it was, I have a cousin who's Naja, and I thought maybe Naja.
Yeah. I love naming. That's one of my favorite. And Personal Leaves, I love the names in this book. I was able to, you know, use names I've always wanted to use that I can't get away with in the contemporary world, you know. I had an aunt named America. You can't really get away with that in a contemporary novel. It sounds too heavy-handed. It's like you're trying to be too symbolic, you know. But in Personal Leaves, it works because people back then, a lot of people had names like that. Of course, everybody called her Murky, which sort of ruined the name, you know. It's such a great name, America, and everybody called her Aunt Murky. Yes. I don't know. I mean, I would love for that to happen. The Hallmark Channel, they took an option on this when it first came out. Like, I think even before it came out, they had an option on it. And they had just started like as a network, and so they wanted to make it, but they were going to make like a miniseries out of it. But then it obviously never happened. And then Catherine Zeta-Jones also read the book, and her agent wrote to me, but they never optioned it. So that would have been interesting because she's Welsh, and she would have been playing a Cherokee woman. So I imagine the Native American community wouldn't have been happy about that, but she liked that character. So I would love for that to happen, but probably never will. Yes. Well, it's up to the book. A Personal Leaves is probably my least revised book, and that goes back to what I was saying about I felt like it was pretty, you know, given to me. I mean, I did revise it, but not as much as my other books. My latest book, Little Fire, I've revised about 16 times, and that's full revision. That's well, no, I shouldn't say that. That's about 16 revisions, with 6 of them being full revisions of the book, you know, from beginning to end. I don't get so much tired of writing it as I want it to be out in the world. You know, I never get tired. I think I would be worried about the book if I had gotten tired of being with the characters, you know. But I do get frustrated. Yeah, I want to be done for sure. Yeah. I think if there are any writers in the room, I always like to say this because I think we're told the opposite so often. I think writing is really hard, and that's why it's good. You know, there was never anything of any worth that didn't take difficulty to create. And so if something's too easy, then it's not going to be that great. It's not going to be good enough if it's too easy, I think.
When you go back to edit a book, do you find yourself reintroducing yourself to your characters and expanding on when you do that?
No, because I've usually spent, you know, I usually know them pretty fully before I start the book. The only book that I didn't was Personal Leaves. My other books, I've known the characters completely, and then I just write the book. I usually spend 4 or 5 years thinking about a book, and then I'll sit down and write it in about a year or so.
My son-in-law really loves Samson here, and you guys wrote that book in letter form, didn't you, to each other?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we actually wrote letters to each other and put a stamp on them and put them in the mailbox. One of the best things about that book to me is that I get letters, like handwritten letters from younger people. Just about every day I'll have, you know, one letter or 1 or 2 letters from a young person, and a lot of times that's the only letter they've ever written, you know, which wouldn't be the case when I was little, but the book leads them to do that. We had several rules for Samson here. One was that we would never talk about the book outside the letters. The whole book had to. Well, what happened is that we both were working on separate books that we couldn't get to go anywhere, and so we decided to write these letters to each other to see if maybe we could jumpstart those characters. And after the first letter, we knew we had a book between those 2 characters. So. We set rules for ourselves that it would be written over 1 calendar school year. We started in August of 2008 and finished it in May of 2009. We had to be finished by that date, and we would never talk about it outside the letters, so we stayed totally in character. So that was fun.
Yeah, that's a very cool thing.
Yeah.
So that means you wrote it by hand.
She wrote a lot of hers by hand, but I typed mine. Yeah. Yeah, and in the book, I think that's the way it is too. Is she mostly handwrites her. You're supposed to think, you know, that hers are handwritten and his are typewritten. But he uses a computer, but she does longhand. I can't write in longhand. I mean, very long. I lose. I forget what I'm wanting to write.
So are they now, those letters all together?
You mean our originals?
Yeah.
Well, you know I'm not that organized. I wish I was as organized as you are, Georgia. I've seen the way you organize your book. It's beautiful what you do with your revisions and all that. Who knows where mine are? Neela probably has hers. They're somewhere. Yeah.
One thing we talk about with your books is just kind of natural and feel. So I always wonder, you know, the great ones make it look easy. What you do to make it really ring true and so it sounds right.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that. You know, I mean, I don't know. I often marvel at, I'll look back at the book and think, Lord, I spent 6 years on that book, you know, and it's just like a 300-page book. I don't know how, you know, I don't know how we hang in that long with one project. But I guess, you know, once the book lights on you, you just have to get it out there, and so you know, like Little Fire, I have read that book. I bet I've read it 40 times. So I wish that, you know, one reader would love it as much as I do. That'll probably never happen. That no reader's going to probably read it that many times, you know. So, but the writer must love the book that way, so the reader can. The writer must love it, so the reader can. You know, does that make sense? but also have distance enough to know when it needs improvement too. To me, that's one of the most interesting things about being a writer is that instinct and that gut of knowing when it needs improvement, but also knowing when to stop improving it. Is somebody over here? Yes. Mm-hmm. There's like 2 sentences, I think, in the Cold Tattoo that tells you that she does. Yeah. And the Cold Tattoo is a separate book, but it can be, I mean, there are things about, I mean, it's not technically a sequel, but there are things about Vine and Serena in there. So I think it's in there. It's been so long since I wrote it, it may not be. Sometimes I'll be talking to book clubs, you know, and they'll read Clay's Quill. And I wrote that book 16 or 17 years ago, and they'll mention a character. I have no idea who it is, you know. They just read the book. There's a hand over here.
I believe it was my conscious art you mentioned one of the ways you can counter apathy is through regional pride.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up and I felt just alienated by the people around me. I didn't feel like I belonged. I always felt like Owensboro, Kentucky was something to be overcome, like a problem. I had to leave it as way as fast as possible. I ended up joining the Army, which ironically I got stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I was trying to get away, but I ended up seeing like 17 different countries and all kinds of stuff. But my question is, growing up, did you always have sort of a regional pride, or did you just one day look back on it and think, wow, you know, I really like this, you know, I feel a lot of pride in this, and, you know, I want to help protect what's here?
I think I'm real different from just about everybody else that I knew who grew up with me. I'll just focus on them. And that almost all of them, especially my closest friends, wanted to get as far away as they could, as quickly as they could. I never felt that way. I don't know why. I mean, I was raised with the same sort of regional pride that they were, you know, so it was more about me than the community or anything. I just always felt just such a deep connection to the land, to the place. I now live about 45 minutes away from where I was raised, and I still miss that land every day. You know, not so much the place when I'm talking about I do miss the people, but it's the land that I miss more than anything. There's just something totally different about that. What I call what Morris Manning, and I always quote him, calls the gestational result of place. And what he means by that is land that you spent so much time with that you know. And it's something as a country we don't have as much anymore. You know, I mean, my mother grew up on land that her people had lived on since the early 1800s. So that's a real gestational result of place. You know, when your family's blood and sweat and all that is literally in the ground. You know, and that's the way I feel about the place where I grew up. I know I can. You know, I imagine that on my deathbed I'll remember that hill and that creek, you know, where I played so much as a child.
After reading A Conscious Art and going to Joe Cervantes' reading down to Bluegrass Museum, it sort of hit me like, there's people that like Kentucky. What is this? And like I told him this morning, this is like an existential crisis. I gotta get out of here, you know. People like it.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling the way you feel either. You know, it's different for everybody. And there are definitely still moments when there are things that I hate about Kentucky that I get so mad about. I get really mad at Kentucky. One time this certain politician we elected, I was so upset about it that I wrote on my Facebook page, never before have I been ashamed to be a Kentuckian. I actually got death threats from people because of that. I mean, I got the angriest letters I've ever gotten because I said that. And that's how the fierce pride people have in being from Kentucky. Well, was there one more question, and I'll let y'all go? Anybody else? I will be up here for a little bit, and I'd love to just answer your questions one-on-one, sign books, whatever you want to do. So thank y'all very much.